The silk was a lie against her skin. It felt alien, impossibly smooth and cool, a language her body had never been taught to speak. Alara stood motionless as the stylist, a woman with pins in her mouth and a severe expression, made a final adjustment to the deep emerald gown. The dress was a masterpiece of architecture, structured to give her shape and form where the world usually saw only size. It clung where it should and cascaded where it must, a fortune in fabric designed to disguise the fact that she was a 20-year-old student who counted out change for laundry. But the most significant lie was the necklace. It settled against her collarbone with the cold, unforgiving weight of real diamonds. She felt its gravity in her bones, a beautiful, glittering leash. She was here to be a wife for one night, a silent, beautiful, adoring prop for the most dangerous man in New York. However, the moment he entered the hotel suite, the lie became terrifyingly real. Marco Moretti did not walk into a room. He consumed it. The air grew still. The light seemed to dim around his broad shoulders, encased in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin. He moved with an economy of motion that was unnerving, a predator who wasted nothing. His eyes, the color of dark, aged whiskey, swept over her. They took in the dress, the professionally styled hair, the diamonds at her throat. His gaze was not appreciative. It was possessive, the look of a man assessing an asset. "It will do," he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the floor. He stopped before her, his presence a physical force. He lifted a hand, not to her, but to the necklace. His fingers, long and elegant, brushed the skin of her neck as he adjusted the clasp. The touch was brief, impersonal, yet a jolt went through her, sharp and electric. It was the touch of a man who owned whatever he laid his hands on. "Remember the terms, Alara. You are my wife. You adore me. You do not speak unless spoken to. You will look at me as if I am the only man in the world. For this, your debts are cleared. Your tuition is paid. You walk away with enough to disappear. Do you understand?" She could only nod, her throat tight. This was supposed to be a simple transaction, a desperate solution she'd found through a series of increasingly questionable campus job postings. A friend of a friend knew a man who needed an actress. The money was life-changing. But standing here, under the weight of his gaze and his diamonds, she understood this was no simple role. This was not a play. It was a cage, and the door was about to lock behind her. The ballroom was a galaxy of crystal and gold. Men in dark suits moved like sharks through the glittering currents of champagne and whispered conversations. The women were all the same, impossibly thin, draped in jewels with brittle smiles and watchful eyes. Alara felt like a different species entirely. She kept her hand on Marco's arm, the hard muscle beneath the wool a terrifying anchor in this sea of predators. She kept her eyes on him, just as he'd instructed, a mask of quiet adoration fixed on her face. She could feel the stares, the dismissive glances that slid over her curves and landed on Marco with questions in their eyes. They saw a powerful man with a conspicuously soft woman on his arm. An anomaly, a weakness. They were seated at the head table, a long banquet affair overlooking the entire room. Marco was flanked by his most trusted men, their faces like stone carvings. Across from them sat the reason for this entire charade. 3 men, the heads of rival families. One was old, with skin like wrinkled parchment. Another was young and flashy, with a nervous energy that betrayed his inexperience. But the third man, the one who mattered, was different. His name was Viktor Petrov. He was not Italian. He was Russian, a brutal outsider encroaching on established territory. He had a shaved head, a pale, scarred face, and eyes so light they looked like chips of ice. And he was not looking at Marco. He was looking at her. Petrov raised his glass, a slow, deliberate motion. "To new unions," he said, his English thick with an accent that was anything but charming. His icy eyes stayed locked on Alara. "Moretti, you have been holding out on us. Such a surprising choice for a bride." The insult was clear, wrapped in the thinnest veil of civility. Alara felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the emerald silk. Marco's hand came to rest on her knee under the table. His touch was not comforting. It was a command. Stay still. My wife has a beauty that is not for shallow men, Victor, Marco replied, his voice dangerously smooth. It requires a discerning eye. Petrov's smile was thin and cruel. Perhaps, or perhaps it is a distraction. I remember your last partner. What was her name? Sophia. She was a piece of art. Tragic, what happened to her? A stray bullet finds the loveliest canvas. No? The air at the table turned to glass. Alara saw a flicker of something raw and unguarded in Marco's eyes. A wound torn open. Sophia. The adult he had failed to protect. So that was it. That was the ghost in the room. He wasn't just protecting himself with this ruse. He was protecting his memory, proving he would never again put a target on the back of someone he cared for. By choosing someone like her, someone so obviously not a trophy, he was broadcasting a message. This one is not for show. She is not a target. She is mine. Petrov, sensing he'd struck a nerve, leaned forward. He gestured to a massive, dark painting that dominated the far wall of the ballroom. It was a Baroque masterpiece, full of writhing bodies and dramatic shadows. Speaking of art, Petrov said, his gaze sliding back to Alara. A painting like that, Caravaggio, I'm told. Tell me, Mrs. Moretti, what does a woman like you see in such darkness? This was the test. The moment he would expose her as a fraud. She was supposed to be silent, to defer to her husband. But she saw the trap. If she said nothing, she was an empty-headed fool, confirming his suspicions. If she gave a simple answer, he would tear it apart. Marco's fingers tightened on her knee, a warning. But Alara felt a different instinct rise up, something hot and defiant. She had spent the last 2 years of her life buried in books, studying exactly this. The darkness, the light, the stories hidden in the brushstrokes. This was her territory. She lifted her chin and met Petrov's icy gaze. She did not ask Marco for permission. She made a choice. I see a master of chiaroscuro, she began, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension. But more than that, I see a man who understood the ugliness of salvation. Look at the apostle's dirty feet, the grime under his fingernails. Caravaggio didn't paint saints. He painted people. He knew that the holy and the profane often live in the same body. She paused, letting her words settle. He painted men like the ones in this room, Mr. Petrov, men who believe their violence is righteous. But he never let them forget the mud they were born in. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Petrov's thin smile had vanished. He was staring at her, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. She had not only answered his question, she had turned his weapon back on him, using the very painting he'd chosen to expose his own brutish nature. The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. Then, under the table, Marco's hand moved. His thumb stroked the side of her knee, a slow, deliberate gesture of approval. It was the most intimate contact they'd had, a silent acknowledgement that sent a tremor through her entire body. In that moment, she had ceased to be a prop. She had become an asset. And that, she would soon learn, was infinitely more dangerous. The deal was no longer about one night. Because she had proven her worth, Marco could not let her go. She had stolen the show, and now she was part of it, whether she liked it or not. The ride from the gala was silent, but the silence was thick with unspoken things. The air in the back of the armored town car crackled. Alara stared out the window at the blurred lights of the city, hyper-aware of Marco beside her. He was a monolith of stillness, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. He had not said a word to her since her takedown of Petrov, but his presence was a conversation in itself. She expected the driver to turn toward her part of town, toward the crumbling walk-up that was her entire world. Instead, the car continued downtown, heading for the glittering spires of the financial district. This isn't the way to my apartment, she said, her voice small. No, Marco said. The word was final. Your apartment is no longer safe. Before she could process that, another car, a dark sedan with tinted windows, swerved aggressively behind them. It paced them for 2 blocks, a shadow clinging to their bumper. Marco's driver spoke a single word in low Italian into a hidden microphone. The town car accelerated with a gut-wrenching surge, weaving through traffic with a precision that was both terrifying and masterful. They took a hard right, tires squealing, then another, losing the tail in the labyrinth of one-way streets. The entire event lasted less than a minute, but it left Alara breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the lurch of a sharp turn, she'd been thrown against Marco. His arm had shot out, not to comfort her, but to brace her, a solid wall of muscle holding her in place. The danger felt immediate, personal. The car descended into a private underground garage, the steel gate rolling shut behind them with a deafening clang. They were escorted by 2 silent guards into a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse. The space was vast and minimalist, all glass and steel and shades of gray. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, a kingdom laid out at his feet. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, sterile, less like a home and more like a fortress. There was no clutter, no sign of a life lived, except for an imposing chest set on a marble table. Petrov is not a man who forgives an insult, Marco said, walking to the bar and pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. Her hand trembled as she took it. Tonight you made yourself a target. He will not see you as my wife. He will see you as a prize. Something to be taken to wound me. So the deal is off, she whispered, hope warring with terror. You can just take me home. I'll disappear. He turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. The deal has changed. You can no longer disappear. Petrov's reach is long. He will find you. Your old life is over, Alara. He said her name, and it sounded different in this room, heavier. I am offering you a new arrangement. You will stay here. You will continue to be my wife in public and in private, until the situation with Petrov is resolved. You will be safe. You will be provided for. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through her fear. Provided for? I'll be your prisoner. You will be protected, he corrected, his voice dangerously soft. There is a difference. She looked at him, at this powerful, ruthless man who had dragged her into his war. She thought of her tiny apartment, her half-finished term papers, the simple, anonymous life she had lost in the space of a single evening. She had been a victim, but her performance at dinner, her decision to speak up, had changed the dynamic. She was not entirely powerless here. She had something he needed, a convincing, intelligent partner who could navigate his world. No, she said, setting her glass down untouched. His eyes narrowed. No. Not for provided for. You want me to play this part? You want my life? Then you will buy it. She took a breath, the number she was about to name feeling insane, impossible. It was more money than her parents had made in their entire lives. It was enough to not just start over, but to build a new world, far away from all of this. She named the price. Marco didn't flinch. He didn't bargain. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, searching. For a moment, she thought he would laugh. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Done. He walked to his desk, took out a checkbook, and wrote. The scratch of the pen was the only sound in the room. He tore the check out and held it out to her. Her name, a life-altering sum written in stark black ink. Money is simple, he said, his voice low. It can be replaced. What you did in that ballroom tonight, that was not simple. Petrov tested you, thinking you were a weakness. You proved you are a weapon. You have a warrior's mind, hidden inside a soft body. He did not see it coming. I did not see it coming. It was the closest thing to a compliment he could give, a confession of respect that felt more potent than any declaration of affection. He wasn't looking at her size. He was looking at her strength. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. The cold mask slammed back into place, his expression hardening into something lethal. Without a word, he turned the phone and showed her the screen. It was a photograph clearly taken from across the street. It showed the front of her apartment building, the familiar graffiti on the brick, the cracked stoop. And standing just outside the door, looking up at her window, was a figure in a dark coat. The photo was time-stamped just 15 minutes ago. Petrov already knew where she lived. He knew who she was. The check in her hand felt like a death sentence. She had the money. She had her price. But she had nowhere to run. Her old life wasn't just over. It was a liability, a breadcrumb trail leading a monster right to her door. The only safety she had was here, in this gilded cage, with the man who had bought her. The choice had been an illusion all along. She was his. The days that followed bled into one another, a strange routine of luxurious confinement. Alara lived in a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment, filled with clothes she hadn't chosen and books she hadn't bought. She ate meals prepared by a silent housekeeper and saw Marco only in the evenings. Their dinners were tense, quiet affairs. He would ask her about her studies, about art, about history, his questions probing and intelligent. He listened with an unnerving intensity, as if memorizing her, learning the mechanics of her mind. She learned him in pieces, too. She learned the sound of his footsteps in the hall. She learned that he drank his coffee black, that he never slept more than a few hours, and that the only time his guard seemed to fall was when he was studying the chessboard in the living room. She would watch him from a distance, see the way he stared at the pieces, his mind leagues away, fighting battles she couldn't comprehend. One evening, he was staring at the board, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "He is playing a queen's gambit," he said without looking up, knowing she was there. "It's an aggressive opening," she replied, stepping closer. "You sacrifice a pawn for control of the center." "He thinks he is sacrificing a pawn," Marco murmured, his eyes fixed on the carved ivory. "He does not realize he has put his queen in play." He finally looked at her, his gaze holding hers. "Petrov has requested another meeting, final one, to settle the territory dispute. He wants me there," she stated. It wasn't a question. He demanded it, a sign of good faith. He wants to see the happy couple together. Marco's jaw was tight. "It is a trap. You're still going." "I am." He took a step toward her, closing the space between them. The scent of sandalwood and cypress surrounded her. "He will try to take you, Alara. When he does, my men will have the justification they need to eliminate him and his entire operation. The other families will see it as a righteous response to a violation of our laws. It will be surgical." He was telling her that he was going to use her as bait. The admission was cold, brutal, and honest. He wasn't hiding it. He was laying the strategy out for her as if she were one of his soldiers. And she found she wasn't afraid. She was angry, yes, but the fear had been burned away, replaced by a cold resolve. "What do you want me to do?" He seemed surprised by her lack of panic. A flicker of something, admiration, perhaps, warmed his whiskey-colored eyes. "I want you to be yourself. I want you to be clever. When the moment comes, create a distraction. Any opening is all we will need." The meeting was held at a neutral location, a private gallery owned by a third party. The space was stark white, filled with ancient artifacts displayed in glass cases. Petrov was there with only 2 guards, a performance of confidence. Marco had 2 of his own. The 5 of them stood in the center of the main room, a cold war of pleasantries. Petrov smiled at her, a predator's baring of teeth. "My dear Mrs. Moretti, you grace us with your presence. I trust your husband is treating you well? He has a reputation for being careless with beautiful things." "My husband values what is his," Alara replied, her voice steady. She kept her eyes on Petrov, refusing to be intimidated. The conversation about territory went back and forth, a dance of veiled threats and hollow promises. Alara stood beside Marco, a silent partner, watching, waiting. She scanned the room, her art historian's eye taking in every detail. Her gaze fell on a small clay tablet in a case near Petrov. It was cuneiform, Sumerian, And it was a fake. A very, very good one, but the tooling marks were too uniform, the aging too perfect. Petrov had a known passion for Sumerian antiquities. It was his one affectation of culture. That was it. That was the opening. As Petrov made a final, arrogant offer, his two men subtly shifted their positions, getting ready to move on her. Marco's body tensed beside her. The moment was here. "It is a generous offer, Moretti," Petrov said, his eyes gleaming. "Perhaps your lovely wife can convince you to accept." Alara took a step forward, away from Marco. A gasp went through the room. She pointed a trembling finger at the glass case. "That tablet," she said, her voice filled with a perfect imitation of horrified discovery. "It's a forgery." Petrov's head whipped around, his face clouding with fury. "What did you say?" "The cuneiform," she pressed, walking closer to the case, drawing his attention, drawing his bodyguards with him. "The wedge marks are too precise. A reed stylus on wet clay would leave slight imperfections, a feathering at the edges. These were made with a metal tool. It's a modern fake. A good one, but worthless." For one critical second, all eyes were on the tablet. Petrov, his pride wounded, his expertise questioned by a woman he had dismissed, leaned in to glare at the artifact. His guards followed his gaze. It was all the time Marco needed. The movement was a blur. Marco's men were on Petrov's guards before they could even draw their weapons. It was brutal, silent, and efficient. Marco himself moved toward Petrov, not with a gun, but with a cold, lethal purpose. Alara didn't watch. She turned away, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the fight. She had done it. She had created the distraction. She had not been bait. She had been a player. When it was over, there was only silence. The two guards were on the floor. Petrov was gone, taken away to a fate she didn't want to imagine. Marco stood in the center of the room, untouched. He looked at her, his chest rising and falling slowly. "The debt is paid," he said, his voice quiet. "On both sides. You are free to go. I will have a car take you anywhere you want. A new name, a new life. No one will ever find you." This was the moment, the escape she thought she wanted. She could take the check, disappear, and forget any of this had ever happened. She could go back to being who? The struggling student she was before? That girl was gone. She had been erased the moment she spoke up at that dinner table. She looked at Marco, at this man of violence and control, who had seen her mind before he ever saw her body. He was a monster, yes, but he was the first man who had ever looked at her and seen a queen. She walked past him, toward the door, and for a heart-stopping second he thought she was leaving. But she stopped beside the gallery's front desk. On it was a guest book and a pen. She picked up the pen, but she didn't sign. She simply held it, the weight of it familiar in her hand. "Where we are going," she said, not looking at him. "I will need a better art collection." He came to stand beside her. He didn't smile. He never smiled. But she saw it in his eyes, a flicker of something that was not coldness, not possession, but a profound and startling recognition. He hadn't just won his war with Petrov. He had found the one thing he was no longer looking for. Not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to stand beside his own. She was not leaving. She was staying. She was choosing to play the game. And in his world of calculated moves and brutal sacrifices, that was the only declaration that mattered.